Have you ever felt the weight of a word that wasn't meant to hurt you, but somehow did? A word that, the moment it crossed the air, tore through more than just your appearance. It cut into your story, your identity, the part of you that you carried since childhood without ever being given permission to call it beautiful. That day, I learned that some moments don't choose the time or the place to reveal the truths we try so hard to hide from ourselves. And when that sentence fell on me, telling me my hair wasn't appropriate, I understood, like a silent punch, that some wounds in the soul only need the world to slip for a second to start bleeding again. I remember every detail as if it were happening right now. The smell of coffee brewing, the distant sound of people chatting, chairs sliding across the floor, and the curious murmurs that began to ripple through the room. It was a place where, in theory, I should have felt safe, a place where I was supposed to be seen as competent, worthy, present. But one simple sentence, spoken in a light, almost casual tone, was enough to make me feel exposed in a way only someone who has had their essence questioned can truly understand. The silence that followed hurt even more than the comment itself. A heavy, uncomfortable silence filled with stares that said nothing and everything at the same time. Stares that judged, measured, evaluated who I was and what I represented. And in that moment, with those words echoing inside me, I realized that my hair had never been the problem. The problem was what my hair reminded people of, what it provoked, what it awakened. It was the strength of an identity many still don't know how to handle. It was the presence of a history that never asks for permission to exist. It was the quiet courage of someone who was born learning to resist, even when all she ever wanted was simply to exist. I felt the heat rise to my face, felt my chest tighten, felt that old urge to shrink, to disappear, to apologize for something that was never meant to be apologized for. But at the same time, I felt an ancient force move inside me, as if voices from generations before me whispered that this moment wasn't just about me, it was about all of us. And maybe that's why you're here now, listening to this story. Because somewhere, at some moment in your life, someone also tried to shrink the most authentic part of you. Someone tried to mold you into their standards, as if your existence were an inconvenience to be polished away. Maybe you were criticized for something that is simply a part of who you are. Maybe it was your hair, your skin, your body, your age, your voice, the way you love, the way you live. Maybe it was simply the fact that you occupied a space they insisted wasn't yours. And that mark, as small as it may seem, settles deep inside the soul, in a place only you know. So before I continue, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. City, state, country. Because this story isn't just mine. This pain, this memory, this kind of humiliation that tries to dim our light before we even understand we have one. It crosses borders, crosses generations, crosses cultures. This story belongs to many of us, and I want to know where you are, because every person who writes where they're from proves that this voice echoes far too loudly to be ignored. The truth is, that day didn't start any differently from any other. I was rushing, trying to get things together, doing my hair the way I always did, trying to make it pretty, presentable, neat enough so no one would find anything to point out. We learn early on how to anticipate criticism before it comes, how to soften our presence so we don't bother anyone. And yet, no matter how careful I was, it wasn't enough. That comment came like a small, sharp blade, thin and cruel, slicing effortlessly through everything I believed was standing upright inside me. And the most shocking part was that no one tried to defend me. No one thought it was necessary to say it was wrong. No one stepped in, no one paused, no one even looked away. I stood there completely exposed, as if I had been peeled out of my own skin. And while I tried to keep my composure, while I fought the urge to disappear, something inside me began to crack. It wasn't just embarrassment, it was injustice, it was exhaustion, it was the pain built up over a lifetime of being watched, evaluated, corrected according to standards that were never made for me. But even as I felt all of that, something else started moving beneath the surface, a strength I didn't yet understand, warming inside me, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment to awaken. And it was right there, in that frozen instant, that I realized that sentence would mark my life in a way no one around me could ever imagine. Because it was in that moment, that small, seemingly innocent attack, that my story began to change direction. And that shift, that part, is what you need to hear. Because behind that humiliation, there was something I didn't yet know God was preparing for me. And that's what I'm going to tell you from here on. But before I reveal the turning point, before I show you the moment when everything began to transform, I need to take you back. Because to understand the pain of that day, you need to understand the path that led me to it. And that's exactly where we're going now. When that comment sliced through the room and landed on me like a weight no one else seemed to feel, something inside me opened, like an old door being forced wide without permission. It was a door I had spent years, maybe my whole life, keeping locked. Behind it were memories I had shaped, erased, hidden. All the wounds I convinced myself were already healed. But the truth is, none of us ever fully rise above the pain we experience at the beginning of our story, especially when that story is marked by constant attempts to mold who we are. And in that moment, I understood that the wound that bled that day did not begin there. It had begun long before. Since I was little, my hair was always treated as a problem that needed fixing. I grew up hearing it was too thick, too wild, too much, too difficult. Words that cling to the skin like dust from a bad day and slowly become part of your breathing. I didn't realize how much those phrases shaped my sense of self, how they taught me to look at myself with a silent, almost automatic shame. It was as if every day I learned to adapt to what others expected of me, to lower my head, to apologize for an identity I didn't even fully understand yet. I remember the mornings when my mother, with all the love in her heart, tried to tame my hair before school. She pulled, twisted, stretched, tied, always saying, "This looks better. This way no one will bother you. This way you look more presentable." I felt the love in her hands, but I also felt the fear behind them. She wanted to protect me from the world's gaze, because she knew, far better than I did, what those stares could do to a black child who learns far too early to see herself through other people's eyes. And in my innocence, I thought it was normal to wake up every day trying to shrink what I naturally was. School was a chapter of its own. Children don't need intention to be cruel. Cruelty wounds even without a purpose. I'd sit in the front row trying to focus on the lesson when suddenly someone would pull my hair, or laughter would erupt behind me, or whispered comments would cut through the air louder than any shout. "It looks like a messy cloud." "Your hair exploded. Didn't you brush it today?" I pretended not to hear, but every word pierced me like a thin, persistent needle, stitching insecurities I would carry for a lifetime. With time, I learned to anticipate the look of curiosity or disapproval before it even came. I learned to walk into spaces already, apologizing with my body, my hair, the room I took up. I learned to move lightly, almost invisibly, as if begging permission to exist. And when that becomes habit, it's more dangerous than any direct insult, because it's no longer the world shrinking you. It's you doing it to yourself. And that's how I grew up, trying to fit molds that were never meant for me, trying to straighten myself, fold myself, reduce myself, trying to make my hair look like everyone else's so I wouldn't stand out. So no, one would comment, so I wouldn't be measured by something I couldn't change. It felt like chasing a kind of approval that never came, like carrying a shattered mirror that always reflected the same distorted image back at me. There was a period in my teenage years when I used harsh products, strong-smelling chemicals that burned my scalp, all to gain a few extra inches of acceptance. I'd smile at people, pretending I loved the result, but no one knew about the nights I cried alone because my scalp burned and my heart hurt even more. It felt like I was betraying myself, betraying the little girl I once was, the girl who only wanted someone to say, "You're beautiful, just the way you are." Over time, these memories piled up inside me like invisible layers of emotional pain, silent shame, failed attempts to fit in. And every one of those layers carried the same name: pressure. Pressure to be accepted, to be appropriate, to be less myself and more what the world wanted to see. It's not easy to carry that for a lifetime. It's not easy to grow up constantly feeling like something about you is wrong, something that needs adjusting, softening, hiding. That's why that sentence on that day hit me the way it did. It didn't arrive alone. It came carrying all the others that came before it. It came with the hands that pulled my hair in childhood, the laughter that echoed in school hallways, the stares that measured my presence without ever truly seeing me. It carried the voices of people I loved who, without intending harm, reinforced the idea that I needed to change myself to be respected. It came as a cruel reminder that society still sees my hair, my identity, as something to be corrected. Maybe that's why so many people relate to stories like this. Because when someone touches your hair, they're not just touching strands, they're touching memories, ancestry, resistance, struggle. They're touching every moment you felt small, inadequate, out of place. It's a wound many of us carry in one way or another. So if you've lived through something like this, write the word courage in the comments, because only someone who has been through it knows how much courage it takes to keep looking at yourself with love, even after so much rejection, disguised as advice. As I was growing up, I tried to believe that these small wounds would disappear with age, that maturity would bring confidence, that time would erase the trauma. But time doesn't erase what was never healed. And that's why, when I heard that critique in a place that was supposed to feel welcoming, everything came rushing back. It was as if I had been transported straight into my childhood again, sitting in the kitchen chair while my mother pulled my hair tight to make it pretty, and I bit back tears so I wouldn't seem weak. It was as if I were back in school, surrounded by the echo of distant laughter behind me. It was as if I were once again standing in front of the mirror, trying to straighten what was born to be curly. And that return, that involuntary journey back into the past, was what gave that moment such weight. The truth is, for many years, I carried those memories as if they were normal, as if they were simply part of every woman's life. But there is a kind of pain so old that we grow used to it, and that familiarity makes us forget we deserve better. And that was exactly what I realized when that comment tried to dim the light I had been working so hard to build. It felt like life itself was saying, now is the time to truly face this wound. Now is the time to understand where it came from. Now is the time to stop running. And that's why I need to keep telling you what happened next. Because this is where the story begins to shift. This is where hurt meets revelation. This is where an old wound starts to rise to the surface so that, later on, something much greater can happen. And this change, this transformation that was about to unfold, didn't come gently. It came like a shock, like an unexpected awakening I could never have imagined in that moment when I felt so small, so unprotected, so far from the woman I truly was. And it was at that exact point in the story that life began guiding me towards something I still couldn't understand, but that was already waiting for me up ahead. I always believed work was the one place where I could finally breathe, where my effort would speak louder than any judgment, where my dedication would be enough to earn respect. But that day I learned that some environments fool us with a false sense of safety, like solid ground that suddenly reveals itself as quicksand. That office, with its bright walls, the smell of coffee, the steady tapping of keyboards, seemed like a space where I could be seen for what I did, not for who I was. And maybe that's why everything hurt even more. The unexpected disappointment, the humiliation coming from someone I believed had enough maturity and humanity to recognize my worth. My boss was always a woman, with a soft voice, stiff posture, and calculated gaze. She smiled at strategic moments, offered praise when it benefited her, and at other times walked past me as if I were part of the furniture. Yet even so, I believed there was at least a basic level of respect. After all, I was never late, never left a task unfinished, never hid from responsibility. It was as if, inside that environment, I had slowly built a version of myself that existed to be professional, competent, discreet, efficient. And for a long time, I really thought that would be enough. But that day, the betrayal arrived in the form of a nearly whispered comment, spoken so casually it sounded like she was pointing out a technical issue. I was organizing some documents when she approached from the side, holding a clipboard, and said, without even looking me in the eye, that my hair wasn't appropriate for the workplace. The sentence struck me like an icy arrow. She spoke, quickly, as if commenting on the weather. You should consider something more neat, more professional. This, like this, doesn't give the image we need. That wasn't advice. It was an attack hidden behind a mask of professionalism. I felt my whole body freeze. It was like the floor disappeared beneath my feet. And the worst part wasn't the comment itself. The worst part was noticing that 2 other people nearby heard it and pretended they hadn't. Their silence confirmed what I already knew. In that moment, I was alone, swimming against an invisible current that pulled not only at my self-esteem, but at every memory my hair carried. And the way she said it, the tone, the disguised disdain, made the entire office feel too small for me to breathe. I tried to keep my posture, tried to keep arranging the papers, but something inside me collapsed. It wasn't just pain, it was shame. A shame that wasn't mine to carry, but still settled on me like a weight too heavy to push away. Because when criticism comes from someone who has power over you, it hits differently. It's as if, in that moment, my boss took off a mask and revealed that I had never been seen as an equal, only tolerated. And that realization is one of the cruelest feelings a woman can experience in a professional space. What marked me most was her expression. There was no anger, no irritation, no impatience. There was indifference, a sharp indifference designed to cut without looking like it was cutting. And that indifference made me understand that, to her, I was nothing more than a replaceable piece. But to me, that moment was a blow to the identity I had spent years building. So if you've ever been diminished in a place where you thought you were safe, write the word respect in the comments. Because when someone tries to erase who we are, it's not just our confidence being taken, it's our dignity. The hardest part was realizing that all of this could have been avoided if she had at least tried to speak to me as a human being. But she didn't. She addressed me the way someone adjusts an object that's out of place, as if my hair, my history, my identity were obstacles to the company's image, as if I had been hired under an unwritten condition not to make anyone uncomfortable. That sentence, spoken with such coldness, revealed that in that so-called professional environment, there was a silent code about who was allowed to be fully human and who needed to reshape themselves to fit in. And as I tried to take slow breaths, fighting to keep the shaking in my hands from exposing the storm inside me, I realized something deeper. I wasn't just hurting because of the comment. I was hurting because, for the first time in a long time, I saw myself the way the world insisted on seeing me. Not as a capable, dedicated, experienced woman, but as someone who needed to adjust herself in order to be accepted. And that hurt more than any criticism ever could. I continued working that day, as if nothing had happened. But every movement felt heavy. Every step echoed through me. The sound of computers, distant conversations, printers, all of it felt louder, as if the entire world were reminding me of the humiliation. It was as if something had cracked inside that place. The office that once felt neutral now felt hostile. The desk that had always been my little corner of productivity suddenly felt too small. Even the air seemed different, carrying a judgment that clung to me. And as the hours passed, I realized how that single sentence had rearranged my thoughts. I began revisiting earlier moments, small situations I had ignored before, subtle comments, lingering stares, compliments that always came with conditions. It was as if, in that moment, I were seeing everything for the first time, and that made me understand that the problem had never been my hair. The problem was the limited vision of people who don't know how to handle women who carry strength in their roots. Strength that doesn't straighten, doesn't fold, doesn't hide. I remember gripping a pen so tightly that marks formed on my fingers. It was the only way to keep my emotions from paralyzing me. But inside, I was shattered. Because when pain comes from someone who has authority over you, it creates a different kind of wound, deeper, more personal. It strikes at your sense of belonging, and in that moment, I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. Not at work, not in that environment, not even in the version of myself I tried to protect every day. But at the same time, even in the middle of that silent humiliation, something inside me began to awaken. A strength I didn't fully understand, rising like a slow, steady tide. It was as if the universe were using that pain to push me toward something I still couldn't see. And that growing force told me that this story, as painful as it was, still had much more to reveal. It was as if that wound had opened not to destroy me, but to lead me to the exact place I needed to be, to finally see a truth I had been avoiding for years. And it's exactly that truth, that turning point, that begins to reveal itself right after this, when something unexpected happens and completely shifts the direction of that silent pain I had been carrying inside me. I heard that sentence as if it had been spoken in an empty room, even though people were everywhere. My boss's voice wasn't loud, wasn't aggressive, wasn't explosive. It was worse. It was controlled, precise, calculated, cold enough to cut without leaving visible marks, yet deep enough to hit the most vulnerable part of my soul. She approached with that silent walk that always made me tense, as if she wanted to catch me off guard, to observe my most honest reaction. And as she leaned slightly forward, with her clipboard resting on her arm, she delivered the sentence that still echoes inside me to this day. "Your hair isn't appropriate for the standard we need to maintain here." Those were her words. Dry, smooth, cold. No tremor in her voice, no hesitation, not a trace of humanity, as if she were pointing out that a frame was crooked or a table needed wiping. And the way she said standard made my stomach turn. There was weight in that word, a hidden intention, a message she assumed I would understand without explanation. It was the kind of sentence that isn't directed only at what's on the outside, but at everything on the inside. She wasn't talking only about my hair, she was talking about my entire identity. What hurt the most was the moment right after, the silence. A silence that felt like it swallowed all the air around me. I felt the heat rise in my face, not from anger, but from that devastating mixture of humiliation and helplessness that only someone who has been publicly diminished knows. I heard the click of a pen being closed, the distant tapping of someone typing, but no one looked at me. It was as if the world had put a spotlight on me and at the same time taken away my voice. I could see from the corner of my eye two people nearby who clearly heard everything, but lowered their heads as if they hadn't heard a thing. They didn't want to get involved. They didn't want to defend me. They didn't even want to acknowledge that what had just happened was unfolding only a few steps away from them. My boss stayed there for a few seconds, watching my reaction the same way someone examines an object to decide whether it's useful or not. She pressed her lips together, hugged the clipboard to her chest, and then turned her back as if nothing had happened, as if her words hadn't opened a wound I would carry for a long time. She walked slowly toward the door, talking to another manager as though she had just given me a routine instruction. And that ease, that calmness, that casual tone, those hurt far more than if she had shouted. I remember the feeling in my shoulders clearly, as if something heavy had been placed on them, something suffocating. My throat tightened in a strange way, like I had swallowed something too large to pass. The noise around me felt distant. I tried to keep organizing the documents, but my hands were shaking not only because of the shame, but because of a deep, overwhelming sense of injustice. That comment didn't hit me only as an employee. It hit me as a woman, as a Black woman, as someone who spent her entire life trying to survive in spaces that were never designed to welcome my existence fully. People's eyes, even when they pretended not to look, said everything. It wasn't ignorance, it was convenience. Staying silent was easier, more comfortable. It was simpler to leave me standing there alone in the middle of the humiliation than to confront a boss known for her emotional control and her ability to hide her intentions. That kind of silence is the cruelest, because it makes you question whether it really happened, whether you're exaggerating, whether you're being too sensitive. But inside, I knew that comment had pierced through years of quiet resilience, had touched the old scar I'd carried since childhood, had reinforced the belief that even when we do everything right, there is always someone ready to remind us of the place they think we belong. The whole room felt smaller after that. The air grew denser, heavier. Every breath felt like I was sharing space with a ghost of shame that hadn't been invited. And for a moment, I thought about going to the bathroom just to breathe, but I didn't. I stayed right there, steady on the outside, even as my soul trembled inside me, even as the desire to disappear fought with the urge to cry, because there was something inside me that had always learned to resist quietly, to hold myself together in the storm, to show no weakness in an environment where any sign could be used against me. Maybe you've experienced that too. And if you have, leave the word strength in the comments, because that's exactly what we need when we go through something like this. The strength not to break in front of those who try to diminish us. The hardest part was feeling that everyone saw the moment, but no one saw the pain. They heard the comment. They noticed the impact. They saw the way my body froze, but they chose to look at their computer screens, at their papers, at anything except the truth. It's unbelievable how, in professional environments, people can pretend oppression doesn't exist simply because it's not hurting them. And that, pretending, creates a deep kind of loneliness, a loneliness that echoes like an empty hallway inside the soul. I remember one coworker walking past me shortly after and placing her hand on my shoulder, but she didn't say a word. It wasn't comfort. It was almost a silent reminder that she'd seen everything, but she wouldn't do anything about it. And that hurt even more. Because when someone sees you being hurt and chooses to remain silent, that absence becomes another layer of pain on top of the pain already there. It's like the whole world is watching you carry something heavy without even asking if you need help. My boss's comment didn't just linger in the air. It stayed inside me, echoing in different tones. Every time I blinked, I saw her expression. The calculating eyes, the slightly arched eyebrow, the impatient look of someone who wanted to say, "Fix this," without explaining what exactly needed fixing. And that's the part that cuts the deepest. It's not the explicit comment. It's the implicit expectation, the belief that there is an invisible standard I should bend myself into in order to be considered professional, as if professionalism had anything to do with erasing my identity, suppressing who I am, swallowing my own history. I stayed there, trying to carry on with the day as if nothing had happened. But the truth is that with every passing minute, that phrase multiplied inside me. I remembered all the times I'd heard something similar, all the people who tried to correct what never needed correcting, all the moments when I was told I needed to fix myself up to look more competent. That comment wasn't new. It was simply another version of an old pain, a pain I had learned to camouflage just to survive. As the clock moved forward, I felt something shifting inside me, as if that comment had awakened a part of my memory I believed was buried. And this part began to pulse, preparing me for something still ahead. I felt that this silent humiliation was only the beginning of a much bigger process, something I could not avoid, something that would force me to confront truths I had been hiding from myself for years. And it was exactly in that emotional whirlwind, in that storm inside my chest, that something unexpected happened. Something I never could have predicted at a moment when everything around me felt like it was falling apart. When the workday finally ended, I walked out of that building feeling like the world had become smaller. Every step toward the bus stop felt weighed down by the entire day, as if the humiliation had stuck to my skin. The street was busy, cars passing, people laughing, lives moving forward, without noticing that while I looked whole on the outside, inside I was in pieces. The worst part was realizing that I was walking fast, not because I had somewhere to be, but because I wanted to escape. Escape the memories, escape the echo of that sentence, escape the silence that followed, escape the feeling that in the place where I poured so much of myself, someone had reduced me to nothing with just a few words. I walked with my eyes fixed on the ground, trying to breathe, trying to look strong, trying to hide the storm I carried inside. When I got home, I closed the door slowly, as if any noise could make the pain grow even more. I leaned my back against the door and let my body slide down to the floor. And right there, on that cold living room floor, the tears finally came. Not gentle tears, but the kind that tear through you, as if every drop carried a piece of the shame, the anger, the helplessness I had swallowed all day. I cried for the comment. I cried for the silent humiliation. I cried for all the years I tried to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. It was as if in that moment, every version of me that had ever suffered because of my hair was crying at once. I didn't want to turn on the lights. I wanted to stay there in the dark, wrapped in the silence of my own home, the only place where I didn't have to hide. And even then, I curled into myself, hugged my knees, made myself small. It felt like being that little girl again, sitting in the kitchen chair while someone pulled my hair tight to make it acceptable. The old pain blended with the new pain, forming a knot in my throat that felt impossible to untangle. My heart felt tight, heavy, tired of always trying to be strong, tired of swallowing pain so no one else would feel uncomfortable. After an amount of time I couldn't measure, I slowly stood up. I walked to the hallway mirror and stood there, staring at myself, my face still wet, my eyes red, my hair a little messy from the crying. And for the first time that day, I truly saw myself, not the employee, not the professional trying to be flawless so no one would question anything. I saw the woman who carried scars she never spoke about. I saw the girl who grew up hearing comments that shaped her self-esteem. I saw the adult who tries every day to balance strength and vulnerability as if it were a duty. And that hurt, but it hurt in a different way. It hurt like truth. I leaned closer to the mirror and touched my hair gently, as if touching a wound. And in that touch, I felt emptiness. An emptiness made of years trying to be what others expected. I took a deep breath, and as I turned to leave the hallway, an old drawer in the cabinet was slightly open. Maybe I had left it open without noticing. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was something bigger calling me. I bent down to close it, and when I looked inside, I saw a small box covered in faded fabric, a box I hadn't opened in a very long time. I took the box in my trembling hands and sat on the couch. I opened it slowly, the way someone opens a memory that might hurt, and right on top was a photo. An old, slightly yellowed picture of my mother, holding my face in both hands, while I, as a child, smiled with thick, proud braids. She was looking at me with a tenderness that seemed to spill out of the image as if she were speaking to me right at that moment. I touched the picture with my fingertips and felt my chest tighten again. But this time, it wasn't pain. It was longing. Under the photo was a note, a folded piece of paper, written in my grandmother's strong, elegant handwriting. I had seen it before, but it had been so long that I had forgotten how it made me feel. I opened it slowly and read words that felt like they had been written precisely for that night. Never let anyone convince you that your hair needs to be tamed. It was not made to be tamed. It was made to be celebrated. Your hair is your crown. Those words entered me like an embrace I desperately needed. It felt like my grandmother was right there beside me, holding my hand, reminding me of the strength I carry. And I felt something awaken inside me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't anger. It wasn't rebellion. It was something deeper. It was identity. It was belonging. It was the living reminder that I come from a line of women who survived pain far greater than a cruel workplace comment. I closed my eyes and remembered something my mother told me when I was so young that I barely understood the weight of her words. What grows from your roots should never be a source of shame. The root is where God places the strength. Back then, I didn't understand. But that night, the sentence came back with such clarity, it felt whispered into my ear. And that was the moment I understood why my boss's comment had destroyed me so deeply. It wasn't just about the hair. It was about everything it represents, about everything I carry, about everything the world has tried, for centuries, to diminish. I stayed there, holding the photo in one hand and the note in the other, as if I were holding two versions of myself, the girl who sought approval and the woman who needed to rediscover her strength. And the more I looked at that note, the more I felt something inside me rearranging itself, as if that sentence, "Your hair is your crown," were stitching together, thread by thread, the pieces of my self-esteem that had been torn apart earlier that day. I took a deep breath and let my body sink into the couch. The tears still fell, but they were no longer tears of pure pain. They were tears of recognition, of awakening, of silent liberation. I knew I would never forget that night because it marked the exact moment when I stopped feeling ashamed and started feeling truth. The truth of who I am, the truth of what I carry, the truth of the woman life was calling me to become. As I breathed deeply, something inside me began to change shape. It wasn't a visible change. It was an internal one, deep, slow, and profound. A change that doesn't begin with courage, but with memory, with ancestry, with the gentle strength of a sentence written decades ago that found the perfect moment to make sense. I closed the box But the feeling of rebirth stayed with me, and it was with that exact feeling that I stood up, wiped my face, looked at the mirror one more time, and realized that something new was being built inside me. And that building, that new strength that began forming in the quiet of the night, guided me into what would happen next, something I could never have imagined would unfold the very next day, something that would shift the direction of my story in a way that would transform everything I felt up to that point. The Yao. Next morning, when I woke up, something inside me felt different. It wasn't an explosive change, not a sudden burst of courage, not a revolt born from impulse. It was something quieter, steadier, deeper. It was as if my grandmother's note were still echoing inside me, as if those words, "Your hair is your crown," were repeating between my chest and my consciousness, pushing back every fragment of me that the previous day had tried to break. I got up slowly, still feeling the weight of the humiliation, but also feeling a new strength filling the places where only shame had lived before. As I showered and let the water fall over my shoulders, I realized I didn't want to hide anything. I didn't want to disguise who I was, didn't want to shrink myself to fit into someone else's expectations, didn't want to keep balancing my identity on top of imposed standards. I looked at my hair in the mirror, still marked by the tears of the night before, and felt a pride I hadn't felt in a very long time. It was there, strong, alive, full of history, full of ancestry, and in that moment, I understood that what hurt wasn't my boss's comment. What hurt was the fact that for a few seconds, I believed her, and that was exactly what I would never allow again. I got dressed calmly, chose clothes that made me feel comfortable, ran my hands through my hair with tenderness, like someone touching a heritage. Every movement felt like a ritual, and as I breathed deeply, I realized that this new strength wasn't made of anger. It was made of dignity, a dignity that had always been in me, but that I needed to rediscover within my own pain. When I put on my shoes and grabbed my bag, I felt as if I were preparing not for another workday, but for a defining moment in my life. A moment that, I knew, wasn't just about me. It was about every woman who learned to stay silent so she wouldn't lose her place. It was about every woman who, out of fear, chose survival instead of truth. The walk to work that morning felt different. People still hurried past me, cars still made noise, but I felt everything through a different lens. It was as if the world had shifted in tone, as if the feeling of defeat from the night before had been replaced with a kind of determination that needed no applause, no approval. I walked with what I call a steady soul stride, not the kind of firmness we put on to look strong, but the kind that rises when we finally understand our own worth. If anyone has ever felt that way, rising differently after a fall, write the word reborn in the comments, because that's exactly how I felt that day. Reborn. When I arrived at work, I pushed open the glass door with a serenity that even surprised me. The space looked the same: papers on desks, fresh coffee, hurried conversations, footsteps moving back and forth. But I wasn't the same. I knew exactly what I needed to do. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't explosive confrontation. It was truth. It was boundaries. It was dignity. It was putting into the world what I had kept trapped inside myself for so long. And with that certainty, I walked to my boss's office. She was there, sitting, reviewing documents, wearing that concentrated expression she used to look more imposing than she actually was. When she noticed me, her eyes lifted quickly, surprised that I had entered without being announced. But her surprise didn't intimidate me. I took a deep breath and stood tall, my body aligned with what I felt. I knew I didn't need to raise my voice to be heard. I didn't need to shake to prove I'd been hurt. I only needed to speak, and to speak with the truth of the woman I am. Before she could say anything, I began. And I began calmly, not with submissive calmness, but with the kind of calm that carries weight. I explained, word by word, the impact of what she had said the day before. I spoke about respect. I spoke about professionalism. I spoke about the emotional weight of the comment she tried to hide. Behind the word standard, I spoke about history, ancestry, identity. I told her that my hair, the same hair she tried to diminish with one sentence, carried a strength her environment could never erase. I spoke firmly, but with elegance. with courage, but without losing softness, because I wasn't there to be small. I was there to show her exactly who I am. She went silent, and for the first time, I saw that my words had cracked the rigid surface she used as armor. Her face changed, not much, but enough for me to notice that she hadn't expected any of that. Maybe she assumed I'd swallow the humiliation like so many do to keep their jobs. Maybe she thought I'd be afraid, that I'd retreat, that I'd apologize. But no, I wasn't going to apologize for existing. Not this time. And when I finished speaking, the silence that filled the room felt entirely different from the silence of the day before. This silence was mine. It was my quiet victory. It was the confirmation that I had reclaimed something they almost took from me, my own voice. She tried to rephrase her comment, tried to soften it, tried to explain it away as a misunderstanding, but I no longer needed to hear her. The truth had already been spoken, my truth. And as she talked, I realized something important. She was no longer standing in front of the employee she thought she could mold. She was standing in front of a woman who had been reborn through pain, who had risen through the memory of her mother and grandmother, who had found in her own hair the crown life had tried to take from her. I wasn't there to fight. I was there to exist, and existing with dignity is the most powerful gesture a woman can make. I left the room before she finished her justification. I walked out with the same steady step I walked in with, feeling my heart beat in a way I had never felt before. It wasn't euphoria. It wasn't pride. It was freedom. And freedom has its own sound, its own vibration, a movement that begins in the soul and spreads throughout the body. When I returned to my desk, I noticed some people watching me, maybe trying to understand what had just happened. But I didn't need to explain. There are things the world sees without us saying a word. There are changes that shine in our eyes before they shine in our actions. As I sat down, I felt a warmth in my chest, as if my grandmother were smiling from beyond time and memory, as if my mother were holding my back, telling me she was proud. It was a deep feeling of belonging. It was as if I were finally taking up space in my own life, and in that moment, I understood that no one can take away what grows from the root. No one can take what was born to be a crown. No one can erase a strength built by generations. And it was that strength that began guiding me toward what happened next, something that transformed not only my relationship with work, but the way I saw every part of my own story. When I returned to my desk that morning, my heart still, vibrating with the courage I had finally allowed to rise, I never imagined what was about to happen. I thought everything would end there, in silence, the way so many injustices do. I thought my words were simply a personal release, something I needed to say so I wouldn't suffocate. But the universe moves in mysterious ways when we speak truth with an open heart. Sometimes it echoes. Sometimes it pushes others to rise too. Sometimes it opens paths where there didn't seem to be even a crack. I was sitting down when I noticed that one of my coworkers, the one who had always kept her distance, the one who had lowered her head the day before to pretend she hadn't heard the humiliation, slowly approached. She stopped beside my desk without saying anything at first, as if arranging her thoughts, and when she finally opened her mouth, her voice came out low, but heavy with a weight I recognized instantly. I heard everything she said yesterday, and I wish I had done something. But I've been through it too, and I didn't have the courage. Her words fell over me like a mix of surprise and recognition, because there was a truth so many women carry, the truth of learning to survive in silence. She continued, eyes glossy, saying she had been corrected before, for her tone of voice, for the way she dressed, for the braids she once wore that didn't look professional. And as she spoke, I felt something opening inside that office, a kind of crack in the invisible wall many pretend not to see. A crack that allowed for the first time the truth to slip through, the truth most people hide out of fear of losing their jobs, losing respect, losing the fragile sense of safety they think they have. Her confession touched me deeply, because in a way, she was saying, "Thank you for saying what I never managed to say." A few minutes later, another coworker approached, a quiet young man, very reserved, who rarely lifted his eyes from the screen. He walked to my desk with uncertain steps, and when he stopped in front of me, he said, "I heard it too, and I want to apologize for not saying anything. I know I should have." His apology carried so much emotional weight that, for a moment, I felt the whole environment beginning to breathe differently. It wasn't just him easing his conscience. It was him acknowledging the humanity that had been stepped on the day before. It was as if the courage I thought had been small was sending out ripples that were finally reaching other people. And the waves kept coming. My department supervisor, not the boss, but someone above me in the hierarchy, discreetly pulled me aside to talk in the hallway. She looked uncomfortable, but also determined. She looked me in the eye and said without hesitation, "I heard what happened, and I know it shouldn't have happened. I want you to know that what you said this morning reached us." I felt my chest tighten, because that confirmed that my words had traveled far beyond the room where I first spoke them. And then she added, "You're stronger than you think." Those words hit my soul like an unexpected acknowledgement. I wasn't seeking applause, I wasn't seeking approval, but feeling that someone had seen my pain and my courage at the same time brought a quiet sense of justice. By the end of the morning, something even bigger happened. My boss herself, the same woman who had humiliated me so coldly, walked through my department with an expression I couldn't identify. She no longer carried that usual air of superiority. There was something like hesitation, maybe discomfort, maybe shame. She called my name, asked me to follow her to her office, and for a moment I imagined she might try to twist the story to make it seem like I was the one in the wrong. But when I entered, she didn't sit down right away. She remained standing, her hand resting on the desk, taking a deep breath before she spoke. "I would like to clarify what happened yesterday." Her sentence came, with pauses, as if she were being forced to think twice before choosing each word. She said she had no intention of offending me, that her comment had been misunderstood, that she was talking about corporate image, but I knew deep down that this was nothing more than an attempt to soothe her own conscience. Even so, there was something different about her. Her posture was no longer aggressive or indifferent. It was defensive. And defensive doesn't mean powerful. Defensive means impacted. Impacted by my courage. She took another deep breath, as if the next words took effort to push out. "If, in any way, I made you feel uncomfortable, I apologize." It wasn't a perfect apology. It wasn't complete. It wasn't transformative on its own. But it was something I never expected to hear from that woman. It was living proof that my voice had shaken something she didn't expect. And in that moment, I understood. When a woman stands up in her truth, even those who tried to diminish her are forced to reposition themselves. When I walked out of that office, I felt something shift in the air, not just in me, in the entire environment. The looks were different, the silences were different, the respect felt new, and not born from fear, but from recognition. A coworker who never spoke to me smiled discreetly in my direction. Another employee, who always watched everything from afar, stopped me in the hallway and said, "You spoke for all of us yesterday, even without knowing it." That left me breathless for a moment, because there, in that narrow hallway, I understood that my pain had turned into a voice for others, that the injustice aimed at me had revealed a collective wound no one dared to touch. And it was later, that same day, that something completely unexpected happened. During lunch, one of the company's oldest employees, a woman everyone respected, who almost never involved herself in conflicts, approached the table where I was sitting. She set her tray beside mine, sat down, and after a few seconds, said quietly, "I've worked here for many years, and I've witnessed a lot of wrong things, but I've never seen anyone speak with the firmness you spoke with today." Her voice carried emotion, but it also carried history. Stories I knew she held inside, stories of resistance, stories that probably had never been told. And then she added, "Keep going. Your truth shook a lot of people." That sentence echoed inside me, because for the first time, I was seeing transformation not only in people's behavior, but in the energy of the place. It was as if the office had been forced to look at itself, as if every person had been invited, even unwillingly, to reconsider their silence, their omissions, their attitudes. The change wasn't complete, but it had begun. And it began with something that, most of my life, people told me had no value. My voice, my identity, my hair, our entire ancestry. With every step I took that day, I felt that emotional justice was unfolding in a way that wasn't loud, but was deep. It wasn't theatrical, but it was true. It wasn't about personal victory, it was about collective repair. And if you've ever lived a moment when life returned to you something someone tried to take, write the word justice in the comments, because that is exactly what that morning represented. A quiet justice, built from the courage of a woman who decided she would no longer lower her head. And it was this quiet justice that opened the path to what happened next, something that would change not only how I saw work, but the entire direction of my story, showing that when truth finds the right strength, it doesn't transform just one life. It transforms everything around it. When I got home that afternoon, after a day that felt like it had opened doors inside me I didn't even know existed, I sat on the couch in silence for a few moments, like someone who needs to listen to her own heart before taking another breath. It was a strange feeling. I wasn't euphoric. I wasn't relieved. I wasn't sad. I felt something I had never felt quite that way, a kind of clarity, a kind of presence, as if every part of me were finally returning to the place it never should have been taken from. And there, in that silence, I began to understand what life had been trying to teach me from the very beginning. The truth is, for a long time, I lived believing I needed to mold myself to fit into spaces. I adjusted myself, shrank myself, silenced myself, hid myself, became whatever I thought would please, what wouldn't draw attention, what wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable. I thought that was the right way to survive. I thought dignity was the same as obedience. But that day, when I finally spoke, when I told the truth with calm and courage, I realized that dignity isn't in fitting. Dignity is in staying whole, even when someone tries to break you. As I breathed deeply and let the memories of the day settle inside me, I felt as though my grandmother's image appeared again. But this time, it wasn't the memory of her words. It was the memory of her gaze, the way she looked at me when I played with my braids, when she fixed my hair for school, when she talked to me about the future. That steady gaze, that saw me as if she already knew life wouldn't be easy, but also knew I already carried everything I needed to face every battle. And that's when I understood. The strength I showed at work didn't begin that day. It had been planted in me long ago, waiting for the right moment to bloom. I remembered my mother too, her hands adjusting my hair gently when I was a child, the way she said every strand told a story. Back then, I didn't understand. But that day, after everything that happened, those words took on a completely different weight. I realized my hair was never just appearance. It had always been a symbol of resistance, a symbol of life, a symbol of who I am and who came before me. My hair carries memory, carries blood, carries spirituality. It carries the strength of all the women who fought so I could be here today, speaking my truth without fear. And maybe that's what life was trying to show me, that beauty isn't in following standards. Beauty is in existing with authenticity, in recognizing that our identity doesn't need to bow to eyes that don't know how to see. Beauty is in understanding that there is strength even in our scars, strength in pain turned into wisdom, strength in shame turned into awareness, strength in silence turned into voice. And that was exactly the strength I felt rising inside me, like a flame that lit slowly, but now burned bright enough to illuminate everything that had once been hidden. I realized that for years, I sought approval in places where I would never find true acceptance. I sought validation from people who didn't have the emotional capacity to understand the depth of my existence. I spent too much time believing I needed to become smaller, to be accepted. But life that day showed me that when we try to shrink ourselves to fit, we don't fit, we disappear. And I was not born to disappear. None of us were. We were born to be root, to be heritage, to be the continuation of a story much bigger than anything an office can comprehend. As I thought about all of this, I felt something inside me finally beginning to heal. Not a fast healing, not an easy healing, but a true healing. The kind that begins when we look in the mirror and recognize our value without needing anyone else to confirm it. The kind that begins when we understand that self-love is not vanity, it's survival. When we understand that accepting who we are is also honoring those who came before us. And this realization brought a deep calm that felt like it was embracing my entire spirit. I stood up and went to the mirror again, just like the night before. But this time, the reflection I saw wasn't filled with pain. My face looked steadier, clearer, more mine. I touched my hair again, and this time I felt pride, a pride so strong that my eyes filled again, not with sadness, but with recognition. It was as if I were seeing myself for the first time, not the wounded woman from yesterday, but the reborn woman from today, a woman who understood that every strand that grows from her roots is an affirmation of existence, a declaration of power, a reminder that there is beauty in everything the world once tried to erase. And that is why I say life has a curious way of teaching. Sometimes it teaches through pain, sometimes through humiliation, sometimes through a comment meant to break us. But beneath it all, life is preparing us to rise even stronger, to speak even clearer, to exist even louder. My boss's comment could have destroyed me, but it didn't. Not because her words lacked the power to hurt, but because my roots were deeper than her intentions, and deep roots cannot be pulled out by shallow words. As I let these reflections move through my mind, I realized this story wasn't just mine. It belonged to all of us, to every woman who has ever felt diminished for simply being who she is, to every woman who has hidden parts of her body, her hair, her soul just to avoid criticism, to every woman who has cried alone at the end of the day because society insists on creating standards that don't embrace our truth. That's why, if you've ever felt something similar, if you've ever been judged for your appearance, your skin, your hair, your body, write in the comments the phrase "I recognize myself," because that phrase is a declaration of healing. It's your way of telling the world you are finding your way back home to yourself. I looked at my mother's photo and my grandmother's note one more time before putting them away. And there, in that mixture of memory, pain, and rebirth, I understood that the lesson life had given me wasn't about hair. It was about identity, about courage, about dignity, about the right to exist, without asking permission, about understanding that every woman carries within her an ancestral strength that never disappears. It only waits for the right moment to awaken. And when that awakening happens, it is powerful enough to transform everything around us, including the things that once wounded us deeply. And as I let that truth settle in my chest, I felt something even bigger approaching, something that would show me that the turning point at work, that quiet shift in the environment, was only the beginning of a transformation that would reach far beyond anything I could imagine at that moment. Because when life starts moving the pieces that have been stuck for years, what follows is usually revelation. And that revelation began to take shape in the days that followed. And when I look back on everything I lived, I understand that the greatest victory wasn't the change in the environment, wasn't the apology I never expected, nor even the respect that began to grow where there had only been silence before. The greatest victory happened inside me. It was discovering that nothing, absolutely nothing, can uproot what grows from my roots. Life tried to teach me that in many ways, but in this experience, I finally learned. My identity does not depend on someone else's approval. My strength does not rely on external recognition. My beauty does not need to be adjusted to fit any standard. I am whole, exactly as I am. And what I carry on my head, in my body, and in my soul is heritage, is history, is sacred memory from those who came before me. So the next time someone says your hair isn't appropriate, remember, it wasn't made to fit into their world. It was made to honor the ones who came before you. Every strand is a witness to a journey that didn't begin with you, but continues through you. Every curve, every coil, every bit of volume is a silent declaration of freedom. And freedom, when it grows from the root, cannot be taken, cannot be diminished, cannot be erased. There are stories that wound us, stories that transform us, and stories that reveal us. This one revealed me in a way I had never felt before. And that's why, before you go, let this truth echo inside you. We are daughters of a strength the world does not understand, but it is exactly that strength that keeps us standing, that guides us, that sustains us, that crowns us. And since you're here with me, let me invite you to continue on this path of healing, truth, and wisdom. Today's story ends here, but another story is waiting for you right now on your screen. A new lesson, a new secret from the matriarch, another deep look into the wounds and revelations so many women carry around the world. Click on the next video and come with me. The journey doesn't end. It simply continues in another direction.